The small town of Maplewood was a place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled beside a winding river, it was a town of cobblestone streets, quaint cottages, and a sense of quiet charm that made it feel like a world apart. The river, known as Silver Stream, was the heart of the town, its waters glistening under the golden hues of the setting sun. It was here, on a warm summer evening, that Ethan Carter found himself wandering, lost in thought. Ethan was a young man of 23, fresh out of college with a degree in journalism. He had returned to Maplewood with dreams of becoming a writer, though his prospects were uncertain. The son of a local carpenter, Ethan had grown up in modest circumstances, but he was determined to make something of himself. As he walked along the riverbank, the sound of the water lapping against the shore filled his ears, and he felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was then that he saw her. Clara Bennett was sitting on a bench by the river, her auburn hair catching the light of the setting sun. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant white dress, and there was an air of grace about her that immediately caught Ethan's attention. She was sketching in a notebook, her pencil moving swiftly across the page, and Ethan found himself drawn to her. "Hi," he said, approaching her cautiously. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Clara looked up, her green eyes meeting his. She smiled, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. "Not at all," she said. "I was just sketching the river. It's so beautiful this time of day." Ethan sat down beside her, and the two began to talk. Clara was the daughter of one of Maplewood's wealthiest families. Her father, a successful businessman who owned several properties in town. She had grown up in a world of privilege, but there was a warmth and kindness about her that made Ethan feel at ease. They talked for hours, sharing their dreams and aspirations, and by the time the sun had set, Ethan knew he had found someone special. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Clara spent nearly every day together. They explored the town, taking long walks along the river, visiting the local market, and sharing stories of their lives. Ethan was captivated by Clara's beauty and intelligence, while Clara admired Ethan's passion and determination. Despite their different backgrounds, they found common ground in their shared love of art and literature. One evening, as they sat by the river, watching the stars, Ethan took Clara's hand in his. "Clara," he said softly, "I know we come from different worlds, but I can't imagine my life without you. I love you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand. "I love you too, Ethan," she whispered. "But I'm scared. My family, they have certain expectations of me. I don't know if they'll understand." Ethan nodded, understanding her fears. "We'll figure it out together," he said. "No matter what happens, we'll face it as a team." For a time, it seemed as though their love could conquer anything. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of their situation began to weigh heavily on Clara. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, was a formidable woman who had always had clear plans for her daughter's future. Clara was expected to marry well, to continue the family's legacy of wealth and status. The idea of her daughter falling in love with a carpenter's son was unthinkable. One evening, Clara returned home to find her mother waiting for her in the parlour. Margaret's expression was stern, and Clara knew immediately that something was wrong. "Clara," Margaret began, her voice cold and measured, "I've heard some troubling rumours about you and that Carter boy. Is it true?" Clara hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, Mother," she admitted. "Ethan and I are in love." Margaret's eyes narrowed, and she stood up, her presence imposing. "Clara, you know what is expected of you. You cannot throw away your future on some penniless writer. This relationship must end." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "Mother, Ethan is a good man. He's kind and talented, and he loves me. Isn't that what matters?" Margaret's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "Clara, you must think of your future. Love is not enough. You need security, stability. You cannot live on dreams and wishes." Clara's heart ached as she listened to her mother's words. She knew that Margaret was speaking from a place of love, but the thought of giving up Ethan was unbearable. That night, she lay in bed, torn between her love for Ethan and her duty to her family. The next day, Ethan met Clara by the river, as they often did. He could sense that something was troubling her, and he took her hand in his. "Clara, what's wrong?" he asked gently. Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "Ethan, my mother, she knows about us. She doesn't approve." Ethan's heart sank, but he tried to remain calm. "Clara, I know this is difficult, but we can't let anyone come between us. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. "Clara Bennett, Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at the ring, then at Ethan. For a moment, she was filled with hope, but then the weight of her mother's words came crashing down on her. "Ethan, I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Ethan felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. "Clara, please," he said, his voice breaking. "We can make this work. I'll do whatever it takes." Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't, Ethan. I can't live in poverty. I can't disappoint my family. I'm sorry." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing by the river, his heart shattered. The days that followed were some of the darkest of Ethan's life. He felt as though a part of him had been ripped away, leaving him empty and lost. He tried to focus on his writing, but the words wouldn't come. Everywhere he looked, he was reminded of Clara, the river where they had spent so many happy hours, the bench where they had shared their dreams, the market where they had laughed and talked. One evening, as he sat by the river, staring at the water, Ethan felt a surge of anger and frustration. He pulled out his notebook and began to write, pouring all of his pain and heartbreak onto the page. He wrote about love, loss, and the struggles of overcoming societal barriers. He wrote about the river and the dreams that had been born and died on its banks. He wrote until his hand ached and his eyes burned with tears. When he was finished, he looked down at the pages, filled with raw emotion and honesty. He knew that he had written something special, something that came from the depths of his soul. He decided to enter the story into a prestigious newspaper competition, hoping that it might bring him some recognition and a chance to start over. Weeks passed, and Ethan tried to move on with his life. He took on odd jobs around town, helping his father with carpentry work and writing whenever he could. He avoided the river, unable to bear the memories it held. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Clara. One day, as he was working in his father's workshop, Ethan received a letter. It was from the newspaper, informing him that his story had won first prize in the competition. Not only would it be published, but he was also offered a job at the newspaper as a staff writer. Ethan felt a surge of hope and excitement. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to make something of himself and prove that he was more than just a carpenter's son. He accepted the job and began preparing to move to the city where the newspaper was based. As he packed his belongings, Ethan couldn't help but think of Clara. He wondered if she had heard about his success, if she was proud of him. But he knew that he had to let go of the past and focus on his future. Years passed, and Ethan's career flourished. He became a respected journalist, known for his insightful and heartfelt stories. He had built a new life for himself in the city, but he never forgot Maplewood or the river that had been such a big part of his life. One summer evening, Ethan returned to Maplewood for a visit. He walked along the riverbank, the memories of his time with Clara flooding back. As he approached the bench where they had spent so many happy hours, he saw a familiar figure sitting there. It was Clara. She looked older, more mature, but there was no mistaking her. Ethan's heart raced as he approached her, unsure of what to say. "Clara," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan," she whispered. I didn't expect to see you here." Ethan sat down beside her, his heart pounding. "I came back to visit. I've missed this place." Clara nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. "I've missed it too. I've missed you." Ethan felt a surge of emotion, but he tried to remain calm. "Clara, what happened? Why did you leave?" Clara sighed, her gaze fixed on the river. "I was scared, Ethan. Scared of what my family would think. Scared of living in poverty. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with regret. "I married someone my mother approved of, but it was a mistake. He was wealthy, but he didn't love me. Not the way you did. I left him a year ago, and I've been trying to find my way back ever since." Ethan's heart ached as he listened to her words. He had waited so long to hear her say that she regretted leaving him. But now that the moment had come, he wasn't sure how to feel. "Clara," he said gently, "I've moved on. I've built a new life for myself. I can't go back to the way things were." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I understand, Ethan. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Ethan reached out and took her hand in his. "I forgive you, Clara, but we can't change the past. We have to move forward." Clara nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I know. I wish things could have been different." Ethan squeezed her hand, then stood up. "Take care of yourself, Clara." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Clara sitting by the river, her heart heavy with regret. As Ethan walked away from the river, he felt a sense of closure. He had finally let go of the past and the pain that had haunted him for so long. He knew that he would always carry a piece of Clara with him, but he also knew that he had to move forward. He returned to the city where his life and career awaited him. He continued to write, pouring his heart and soul into his work. He found joy in the simple things: a good book, a walk in the park, the laughter of friends. He knew that he would never forget Clara or the love they had shared, but he also knew that he had to live his life for himself. And as he looked out over the city skyline, Ethan felt a sense of peace. He had come a long way from the young man who had once wandered the riverbank, lost in thought. He had faced heartbreak and loss, but he had also found strength and resilience. He had learned that true happiness comes from within, and that no matter what life throws at you, you have the power to rise above it. And so, with a heart full of hope and a mind full of dreams, Ethan Carter walked into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Years later, Ethan returned to Maplewood once more. He walked along the riverbank, the memories of his youth flooding back. He sat on the bench where he had once sat with Clara, watching the sun set over the water. As he sat there, a young couple walked by, hand in hand, their laughter filling the air. Ethan smiled, remembering the love he had once shared with Clara. He knew that their story had been a chapter in his life, but it was not the whole story. He stood up and walked to the edge of the river, looking out over the water. The River of Dreams, as he had once called it, had been a place of joy and sorrow, of love and loss. But it had also been a place of growth and transformation. As he stood there, Ethan felt a sense of gratitude for the journey he had been on. He had faced challenges and heartbreak, but he had also found love, success, and fulfillment. He had learned that life is a river, ever flowing, ever changing, and that the key to happiness is to embrace the journey, no matter where it takes you. And so, with a heart full of peace and a mind full of dreams, Ethan Carter walked away from the river, ready to face whatever the future held.